Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. Today, we are going over fat loss phases, maintenance phases, and massing phases, the three kind of components to any body composition journey, any sort of fitness journey. No matter where your goals really lie right now, you're going to encounter these in one shape or another as you go through this process. So where would you like to start?
So I thought this was really important to bring up because I think a lot of the fat loss clients that I get, and just a lot of people in general, don't know that this concept exists. Mm-hmm. The fact that there are multiple different cycles to take your body through to ultimately get the body shape that you're looking for or get to the body composition goals that you want. And that's not one long diet for your entire life until you hit your ultimate goal. Mm-hmm. Like, there are a lot of other processes involved, and contrary to what most people believe, there should be an end date to your diet.
Yes.
It's not something that you should be doing forever and ever and then failing and falling off and then getting back on a diet and failing and falling off the way that most people cycle through. So that's not what we're talking about when we say cycles. But there are intentional cycles that you should move yourself through in order to shape the body that you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And depending on how much weight you have to lose or how much mass you're trying to gain will determine how you go through these cycles. So even somebody that has, say, like 10 pounds to lose will go through these cycles. Somebody that has 100 pounds to lose will go through these cycles. It'll just look a little bit different. So if you're especially coming into this with like a very big weight loss goal, like to the tune of 50, 100 plus pounds, then you should know that it's not going to be just a straight rush to the finish. Like, this Biggest Loser, the show, is not how this process works for long term.
Not how it's supposed to work if you want sustainable results. And has it happened? Sure. And have people lost all of their weight in one diet phase and been able to keep it off for a significant length of time? Sure. But as we've talked about, those are generally exceptions and not how it looks for most people. And it's also important to know that you're probably going to have to go through multiple phases or multiple cycles, multiple fat loss cycles to reach your goal. It's not just going to be one fat loss cycle, one maintenance cycle, or one mass gain, one fat loss, one maintenance. Right. It's you going through these cycles repeatedly until you reach your ultimate goal.
And it's worth noting that even those people that do succeed with that, they go through that huge long fat loss phase and they actually get down there and they keep it off, they're still in a worse position metabolically than they would have been otherwise. And so we'll get into that.
Well, and I guess one last thing for that, for that piece is, even for people who only have, 10, 15 pounds to lose, depending on what your diet history has looked like, it still might take you several cycles to lose that small amount of weight. Yeah. So it doesn't, when we're talking, multiple cycles, it really doesn't matter how much weight you have to lose. That's not what determines how many cycles you go through. Your personal body and your health history and your long-term goals, all of those different factors go into how many cycles you'll potentially have to go through.
Yeah. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about the cycles themselves. So with respect to any changes in overall weight, whether that's a fat loss cycle or more of a massing cycle where you're trying to build muscle, my typical rule of thumb for the duration of time for these is around 3 to 4 months. And yours might be a little bit different, but the reason for this, and the reason it's not just like, all right, we're going to lose fat for a straight year, or we're just going to put on mass for a year straight, is that your body starts to, your body doesn't care what you look like, first and foremost. You've got to understand that. And so we're playing with survival mechanisms here. And as you start to either push your calories lower and lower for an extended length of time, or elevate them for an extended length of time, your body starts to adapt to what's going on. So in the case of fat loss, if you're dieting for significantly longer than 3 or 4 months at a time and you're in that caloric deficit and you're not cheating all the time. This is another big caveat to that.
If you're actually to your time periods, if you're consistently following the guidelines.
So if you're actually staying in the caloric deficit and you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, your body will start to down-regulate all of its different internal processes so that it's burning off less and less calories. And the lower that you push those calories, the higher the likelihood of muscle mass that you begin to lose.
And the higher likelihood that you might run into other issues, potentially hormonal or digestive or what have you, just because your body then has to start prioritizing the most important systems and processes and sending less energy and nutrients to what it deems to be less important, but everything in your body is important. Yep. So it starts to cause problems over time.
More irritability, more hunger issues, so all that kind of stuff. And so you're also risking the loss of the lean tissue, which is obviously something we don't want because that's going to have a major effect on overall metabolic rate for future fat loss. And then on the flip side, if you are going through a massing phase and you're trying to get as big as possible, put on as much muscle as possible, after a significant period of time where you're in that caloric surplus and you've gained a decent amount of weight, the more you continue to push that, the higher the likelihood of that weight that you gain coming from fat as opposed to muscle tissue. So we have these periods, these phases that we're saying 3 to 4 months on average. And again, there are different circumstances where that might change. But that's a pretty good rule of thumb because in the middle of those, we want to break these up. And we want to do that so we can reset ourselves hormonally, metabolically, and establish new,
give yourself a little bit of a
break for sure, and establish a new set point that allows your body composition to kind of settle into the changes that you've made.
Well, so I think that's the other thing that a lot of people miss is for people who are familiar with any cycles or phases, I think a lot of people understand fat loss or cutting and mass gain or bulking, like some version or variety of those terms people understand. But I think the less understood phase would then be maintenance, where you actually have to reinforce all the hard work that you've put in. You can't just jump between fat loss and mass gain and go back and forth because that's going to leave you in a place where you're not going to retain as much of the progress that you made. And you are going to end up doing a little backpedaling, and then those future phases aren't going to be as successful for you.
Right. Yeah. You can think of any mass that you've just built or any fat that you've just lost as very kind of slippery, in the sense that if you were to immediately change up your calories, so if you were to just put on a good chunk of muscle mass in the last 3-4 months, and then you immediately cut because you're like, all right, I want to lean out now, then you have a very high likelihood of losing a bunch of that muscle tissue that you just built because your body hasn't had time to really let it settle in.
And you gotta let it bake.
Yeah.
Gotta let it bake in.
Same thing with the fat loss too. Like if you just finished cutting and you've been in this caloric deficit for so long, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready to build some muscle, and you jack up your calories by 1,000 or 1,500, you're not just going to start building muscle. You're going to start putting on a bunch of that fat right back because your body's in this kind of storage mode where, we have all these extra calories coming in. We've been starving for so long because we've been in this caloric deficit that we're just going to store all of this away for when we need it.
Yeah.
And it's not going to go to muscle tissue. I assure you that.
No, you need those transition periods built in. So maintenance is something that you can use as a transition. And then ultimately maintenance is where you want to spend most of your life, once you achieve your ultimate goal. Maintenance is where most people are supposed to hang out long term.
Right. Yeah. Maintenance is the end goal. And in the middle of these cycles to get you to where you want to be. So if ideally our fat loss or massing phase is 3 to 4 months, the maintenance phase I'll typically keep in like the 1 to 2 month range. For people that are sticking to the plan, doing things really well, seeing great progress, a lot of times 4 to 5 weeks is just a really solid new set point to establish. If we've been dieting, we're starting to slowly bring those calories back up, let the energy levels rise again, hunger's completely taken care of, and your training should be feeling good. Then on the other side, if you've been massing for those 3 to 4 months, bringing it down just a little bit. We're not trying to like go into cutting mode, but especially if you've been eating to the point where you're kind of pushing yourself to eat more food during the day, it's a way to kind of relax back from that for these few weeks, to just let your body kind of tighten up a little bit, start using more of the fuel that you're giving it so it's not such an excess. And then once you've finished those 4 to 5 weeks, maybe 8 weeks if you need a little bit more, you can reassess and see where you want to go from here. Do I want to continue down the same path of either more fat loss or more mass gain, or do I want to switch things up and refocus my attention to the other side of the body comp spectrum?
Absolutely. Well, and so just to kind of reinforce what Kyle said, these transition phases that we're calling maintenance are happening just very small, like caloric deviations from where you ended that cycle. So we're not necessarily taking you to your potential estimated maintenance calories, which is a little bit different. We're talking about maintaining the progress you've made within that cycle, which is going to happen at a slightly different calorie point than what I might consider somebody's overall caloric maintenance, which is kind of a number that we estimate and then find through the process of these different cycles.
Yeah. And the one thing I do want to mention about maintenance is this is something that you want to program in when and we touched on this in the beginning, you want to program this in when you're very good at following the plan. But if you've been on your fat loss journey and you've been trying to diet for the last 6 months, and you're going through these periods of one good month, couple bad weeks, another couple good weeks, another couple bad weeks, you haven't really been in a deficit long enough to need a planned maintenance phase. Like this is talking about we're pushing the limits of what your body can handle for this brief period of time, these 3-4 months, and then we need to have that reset. But if you keep kind of bouncing yourself out of this, whether that's just lack of adherence to the plan or whatever, then you're not necessarily going to need this particular phase.
Well, and the other thing too is if you're doing this on your own, sometimes maintenance happens naturally without you intentionally like planning it to happen, because again, your body's going to adapt, and your body essentially tries to put you in maintenance all the time. And that's why you're constantly fighting to create a caloric surplus or a caloric deficit, depending on what your goals are. So you might find that you've naturally been kind of in a maintenance or transition phase for the last 3 or 4 weeks because you've been doing everything correctly, you've been keeping things consistent, but your progress has stalled. So that's kind of where you can look back based on the progress you made or the last week that you saw some sort of change or, measure of progress. And you can kind of say, okay, maybe it's already been 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe I spend another 2 or 3 weeks here at this same calorie level because I'm already maintaining, I'm already in that transition period, and then, move on to your next cycle from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those are kind of how we would plan out, this is my massing phase, this is my maintenance phase, and set up like an overall periodized diet and structure to what you're doing. But there are other reasons why you would want to change up your phase that aren't necessarily planned for. The easiest one to kind of think about is you have completely stalled out at very low calories, right? And so like you can't push these any further. It's time to change course. We don't want to just jump right back into a mass gain phase, but this is where we start doing the reverse diet, bring your calories up nice and slow. And depending on how high you can take those in your maintenance phase, you might be able to push another fat loss phase on the tail end of that. It depends on how lean you are and where you're trying to go. Or it might be time to transition into maintenance for a few weeks, and then from there transition into a full-blown reverse where you don't necessarily have to be trying to gain weight in that period, but really just trying to push those calories
as high as you
back
can get
up.
them.
Yeah, as high as you can so that you have room on the other side for fat loss in the future.
So, and I think this also goes along with feeling the natural end of your diet phase where you just start feeling bad. You just feel crappy. So, maybe you have, you're pretty grumpy all the time, or you're just really hungry all the time, or you found that your workout volume at this point is leaving you too exhausted or under recovered, or you just can't maintain it anymore. Maybe your weekly schedule changes and you can't keep up with 6 days a week of whatever you were doing before. So sometimes you just feel this natural end to your diet phase, which isn't a bad thing. And if you didn't, achieve your ultimate goal, again, keep reminding yourself that it's going to take multiple phases to get you there.
Yeah.
And it's just an ongoing process, and that's okay. It's okay for you to call it and say, you know what, I think this is the end for me, then go into your transition. And
you also have to be there psychologically. Like if you're mentally not in the game, then quit trying to force it.
Yeah, even if you could go further physiologically, Kyle's right. If you're not there mentally, then it doesn't matter.
I think this is something that a lot of people miss, like even in the beginning, is like if you're not mentally prepared to make changes and to, I don't want to use the word suffer because that's too intense for this, but just to be uncomfortable in certain stages and just know that this isn't going to be the easiest process that I'm subjecting myself to, then you have no business doing this. That's why people fail. And when you reach that point of this process and you're like, you know what, I'm not in it right now, transition out of it. Slowly ramp your calories back up, get yourself into a nice new set point, higher maintenance calories that are much more manageable without a ton of work and effort to maintain. And then as you kind of get that desire to refocus again, then you can transition back, and that will happen naturally. I can't tell you how many times I've fallen in and out in love with training or nutrition or whatever, and I just put those things on the back burner. Like it's fine. You can come back to it later, but don't set yourself up with these completely ridiculous expectations when you're not actually willing to do the work.
Yeah. Well, and I think it helps to be intentional, to go into this process knowing that there are multiple cycles, but to also go into this process knowing that you have like the power and permission to call it when you want to. Like you don't have to feel bad about it. It doesn't mean you failed anything. Like it actually means that you're on a better path to be able to say, I'm going to make the intentional decision to stop and to go into maintenance and to just like live my life for a little bit. I think that's really, it's helpful to know that you have that option.
Right. And maintenance doesn't mean like, all right, we can just go eat pizza and do whatever.
That's not quite what maintenance is.
It's like there's still structure to what you're doing, but your intention isn't to see weight loss every single week. It's to build your calories back up, get you to a point where you're feeling strong, your energy level's high, you're not hungry, and you're just comfortable with what you're doing. And then as things change and as you decide which route that you want to go and life kind of presents you with the opportunities to refocus on that, then you can get back into it. But I think a lot of people just, especially when they have a big weight loss goal, they don't even think of that. Their mind is just always on weight loss. And then even when they're not mentally in it, they feel guilty about not being so focused on it. And there's no reason to.
It doesn't have to be your priority all the time. It really doesn't. And it shouldn't be, to be completely honest, because again, you really want to make the most out of your maintenance phases. You want to be able to enjoy your life and enjoy yourself and be more flexible. That's kind of the point. That's that like mental break and that relief that gets you motivated and set up if you do want to, go into a fat loss cycle again, if that does happen to be your goal in the future.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be your focus 100% of the time. And if other things happen in your life that are more important, it also doesn't have to be a priority in those situations.
Right.
Sometimes things come up and you just realize, you know what, this needs to take a backseat right now.
Yeah, and that's perfectly reasonable. So other reasons why you might switch up your phase. On the flip side, if you have gained a lot of excess body fat. So if you're continuing to try to get bigger, get stronger, there comes a point where once you've kind of crossed the threshold body fat percentage wise, that you start just gaining more and more fat with the weight that you put on. And that has to do with your insulin sensitivity and your body's ability to use carbs properly. And so when you've reached that point where you're like, okay, this is a little bit more than I want to carry right now, you can go through, you can back off, get back into maintenance mode for the next 4 weeks or so. And then another thing that you can even do beyond that, if you still want to continue growing further, is go through something like a mini cut, which would be like to sometimes 4 weeks, maybe you push it to 8 weeks of actually getting back into a bit of a caloric deficit just to lean out so that you can start seeing those benefits that you would have with more insulin sensitivity and from a leaner body fat perspective, so that you can, after the end of that mini cut, go back into maintenance for another 4 weeks or so and then start elevating your calories again. And that can be really good for people that are just trying to put on a lot of size, whether that's competitive related with like powerlifting, bodybuilding, or like a sport like football or something like that. And knowing that you're not just going to put on 50 straight pounds of mass and it's just going to make you look jacked. Like it's not going to work that way. Same with fat loss. You're going to have to build up, cut back down, build up, cut back down. And that kind of seesaw, teeter-totter back and forth will eventually bring your overall lean body mass up if that's the direction that you're trying to go. But it's, again, going to be multiple cycles.
Well, and we've talked about this before. It's very hard to convince your body to build muscle. So that process is also going to look much different than a fat loss cycle. The numbers are going to be smaller. The movement of your progress is going to be slower, as it should be, because it's a little bit more of a barrier to increase that muscle mass.
Yep.
So those cycles are going to typically look a lot different than a fat loss cycle, usually.
And then the other reason for switching up your phase is that you've reached your goal. How many times
what a concept!
Did we get to talk about that?
Wow, you've done it. You did it. You made it. You reached your goal. This does happen.
Yeah,
does happen to people.
Does happen.
And it can happen for you too, especially if you're more intentional about your process and you understand that you need to navigate through these different cycles. But once you achieve your ultimate goal, you should be going into maintenance. You don't need to eat, 1,300 calories forever to keep yourself or to keep those results that you've achieved. Right. Hopefully you didn't get there on super, super low calories to begin with. But once you reach that ultimate goal, I think people get a little lost because they don't know what to do after that. It's such a novel concept. We don't really talk about what happens after you reach your weight loss goal. We don't talk about it often enough. And so I think this especially happens for people who go through like challenges and they want to lose 10 pounds or 15 pounds and they do it and they, do the 3-month challenge or whatever. And they get to the end and they're like, okay, so what do we do now?
Right. Yeah, no, it's always the big question because no diet out there has the next steps of, well, what do I do when I'm done with this?
Or they try to convince you that you need to just continue doing what you're doing to maintain it, which is not true.
Yeah,
it's not
like
true.
The whole like, oh, this is how you got here, so this is what you have to do to maintain. Completely wrong. So maintenance is a walk in the park compared to changing your body.
Easier than people think, but it's easier than changing your body. Your body wants to maintain itself. That is what everything in your body is striving for 100% of the time is equilibrium. And it wants to stay the same and keep everything nice and consistent. So, once you achieve that goal, we've talked about how to kind of settle in at, this new body shape or whatever you've achieved. So you're spending a month, a few weeks settling in at, maintenance at a lower calorie level. But then the ultimate goal would be to get your calories up to a more comfortable place for you long term that gives you the flexibility that you personally want in your life based on the way that you would like to eat or like to live. And there are some limits, sure. But, if you achieve your goal training 6 days a week, but ultimately you'd rather train 5 days a week or 4 days a week, that can be part of your transition. Or, if you got to your goal by eating 1,400 calories, you feel more comfortable at 16, 17, even if you could probably eat a little bit more. If you've already reached your goal, there's not as much of a reason to push those calories higher as long as your body's getting the basics of what it needs. So you can kind of find what feels the most comfortable to you based on, again, your preferences, your lifestyle, based on your body's needs for sure. But a lot of it comes down to how you want to live. Yep.
Maintenance, once you've achieved that ideal body composition, is all about slowly increasing or decreasing your calories, depending on where you're coming from, to the point where you feel content, You're able to eat foods that you enjoy with regularity. You have no hunger issues or energy issues, and you feel strong. That should be the objectives of maintenance, and then building your lifestyle around that. Of course, you can always decide that you want to improve even more. You want to build more muscle mass. You want to get leaner in the future, whatever.
Or you could decide that you want to eat more calories on a daily basis. Okay, cool. So you slowly push those calories a little higher to establish, a higher level of maintenance.
Yeah.
You have the power to do more than you think. I think it's just about knowing that you do have that power and then intentionally making those choices or planning it out.
And just think about, like, if you've been stuck at a weight for so long and you've done a million different things, and sometimes you've completely stopped trying to follow anything and you've stuck there. That's what maintenance is like. It's really that easy to stay in that same spot.
So the transition into maintenance should be slow. So if, like I said, so if you're training at 6 days and you'd rather train at 4 days a week long term, don't just drop 2 days right away, right off the bat. Right. Don't drop 2 days and increase your calories by 500. These steps need to be slow. We've talked about reverse dieting before, how it's slow and intentional changes week over week and kind of letting your body adjust and settle in as you go. And that is the important part of maintenance, not getting to the end of a 3-month challenge and then going back to your sedentary lifestyle where you ate whatever you wanted before.
Right.
You can transition to get yourself closer to that point if that's what you want, but it does need to be slow and intentional. So it is going to take, a few more months of your time. You haven't just reached the ultimate end, right? So when you reach your goals, that's not really the end point for you. You still have a few months more or a few months of work to go through to get yourself to a comfortable maintenance phase or a comfortable maintenance spot.
Yeah, no, if you think about it, ideally, I would say probably you've hit your end goal. The next 3-month phase should be you building back up to a really strong maintenance. So treating that as the end point as opposed to I hit my goal weight, time for ice cream.
That gets a lot of people in trouble. And that's not to say that you can't celebrate a little.
No, you can go and celebrate, but it just can't be the new norm.
Yes,
from
but
there.
It can't be every day moving forward. Like, if you want to treat yourself, for a day, whatever, great. And then you do need to rein it in a little bit and go through this slow, intentional process of working yourself to a position where your body is settled in and ready to maintain.
Yeah, so don't just completely let your mental game go at the end of this. Like, yes, you've achieved this goal that you've been striving for so long, and I understand the desire to relax. But if you can just keep pushing for those next few months to really establish what you've built, it'll be much harder to lose than if you immediately disregard everything that you've done at that point. Because if you're the type of person that it takes a lot of cardio to get really lean, I'm kind of the same way. You can't just expect that the 45 minutes of cardio that you've been doing daily is going to just disappear and you're going to keep the same conditioning. So just like walking the diet back up, we need to walk back the cardio bit by bit.
Slow transitions.
And alternate weeks sometimes too. So if you're going to up your calories 1 week, then maybe keep the cardio the same. And then the next week, keep the calories the same, but drop the cardio a bit, so on and so forth.
And that can work based on your preference. We've discussed
just
how...
Just like the dieting side.
It really is your call. So based on what you feel like is reasonable or realistic, if right now you feel pretty okay with the amount of food you're eating, but you hate doing your cardio, then drop back on cardio first. Or if you're fine with the cardio you're doing and you'd rather just eat more, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in a row, you increase calories until you feel comfortable and then you can taper down your cardio. So again, it's just about having a plan and being intentional, and those little details can really just come down to what your preference is, what you want.
And at the end of the day, you can reach your goal. Just remember that.
You absolutely can reach your goal.
That is a point in this process.
You can reach your goal without totally killing yourself or feeling miserable. And then you can maintain the goal once you've reached it. I think it's also maybe good to mention that depending on what your ultimate goal is, like if your goal happens to be 5% body fat, that may not be sustainable long-term depending on your genetics, depending on your lifestyle. So there is a certain level of like realistic expectations that we need to have.
Yeah, you're not going to maintain show condition year round.
Yes.
Doesn't happen. Because if it does happen, then you're doing it wrong, because then you're not actually peaked.
Or you just have insane genetics. Like there are people out there who do it, and generally those are the people we see on
it's probably not
social media the most, are the people who are just very, like, not that they haven't worked very hard for where they are, but they have the genetics to support the body shape they want to sustain long term.
But if you have those genetics, you're probably not asking these questions.
Yeah, no, you're not.
You're probably already eating pizza and training however often you want to train,
keeping your six-pack.
You look crazy. So it's fine.
So that's another thing to keep in mind too, is understanding. I think this applies really to both women and men. Understanding like what is realistic as a body shape, not just based on your gender, but also based on your genetics specifically. And knowing that you don't need to be shredded 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And most of the people, most of the people you see that aren't shredded 100% of the time.
That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, I know. I just thought it was relevant. Should throw it in there.
It definitely is. So yeah, structure out your planning with these phases in mind. I'm sure you've heard of fat loss, mass gain, but maintenance is probably pretty new. And so just to reiterate, 3 to 4 months in one focused direction, whether you're gaining weight, losing weight, split it up with a month of maintenance, maybe a little bit more if you need it. And then continue that cycle until you get where you want to be. Don't be afraid to stop for mental breaks, and just let your body do what it needs to do in that time.
Yes. So achieving your goals is possible. There should be a date for the end of your diet, whether you've reached your ultimate goal yet or not. Every fat loss phase has an end date. So I think, if you're watching this, you aren't working with a coach, check yourself. Okay, think back to when you started this most recent diet phase. Is it time for you to take a break? Maybe, probably.
Have you stuck with it for that duration of time too? Or have you been slipping up through there? You'll have to assess that yourself.
Have you spent a significant time in maintenance ever? Because if you haven't, again, this goes back to a lot of the people that I personally see who maybe have 10, 15, 20 pounds to lose, but have dieted their entire life. You might not lose 10 to 15 pounds in one fat loss cycle. You might lose 5, realistically, because your body has adapted to your, fat loss tricks, the things that you've done over the years. So you need to be a little realistic, and maintenance is going to help you get there over time.
Yep. And I would say one last thing with the maintenance is, if you've never really done it before and your whole mentality has been fat loss, it can be kind of hard to shift that focus. And so what I would do in that interim to take your mind away from that is focus on just getting strong. Focus on getting stronger each week. Or if you're more cardio focused, doing a better run or a better time each week on whatever that is. So shift the focus from body composition to performance as you're going into that maintenance
or
phase.
Maybe focus even on just like enjoying your life and not be so wrapped up with dieting and enjoy your food, enjoy your time with friends. Yeah, it helps to have a non-weight related goal. Performance goals are awesome to have, but it might also be your goal to have a little grace for yourself and give yourself permission to eat a donut if you want it.
Right.
That's okay.
No, and I'm speaking to people kind of like myself, where if I don't have an actual goal behind the training or the nutrition that I'm doing, it's like there's no purpose to it.
No.
So
it helps to have a purpose.
If you need something to hold on to, of okay, I'm not trying to see a lower number on the scale every single week, I'm trying to see more weight on that barbell, or whatever else it is, then that's where I would shift my focus from just a purely training perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
Awesome. So those are your phases. Put them into action. If you've got any questions or things that you'd like us to cover in the future, feel free to reach out to myself at hypertrofit.com. You can find Alexa at therootedrd.com, and we'll see you guys again next week.
We'll see you guys next week.